Welcome the Governance and Policy Committee meeting of Wednesday, April 24th, 2024 will now come to order. Trustees are reminded that as this is a committee, it is the appropriate place for discussion of agenda items before they proceed to board as applicable. Following staff presentation of each report, discussion will be open for trustees. We will now begin with our land acknowledgement. The Durham District School Board acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our school boards and schools are located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge that the Durham regions forms a part of the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, the Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. It is on these ancestral and treaty lands that we teach, learn, and live. Are there any declarations of interest this evening? Seeing none, we shall proceed. May I have a motion to approve the draft agenda? Thank you, Trustee Morton. All in favor? The motion has been carried. The agenda is approved. Can I please have a motion to approve the draft minutes of the Governance and Policy Committee meeting of March 27, 2024? Thank you, Trustee Oldfield. All in favor? The motion has been carried and the minutes are approved. This evening, we have one item coming forward for information regarding our bylaws and public question period. I would now like to call on Executive Lead Robert Surjanic and General Counsel Carter to present the report.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I'm pleased to share this report as a follow-up on the discussion of the March 27th meeting of the Governance and Policy Committee on this topic. The report shares additional information following a cursory review of other boards' processes around public participation in meetings and our board's existing processes. It also highlights recent changes made by the board to uphold the board's commitments and statutory duties under legislation and board policy and procedure. In addition, it highlights that a communications audit for the district is currently underway, of which there may be insights to gain from that process, alongside the need to analyze previously collected data on this, however, now looking at it on this topic that inform the Ignite Learning multi-year strategic plan. Due to the short amount of time from the last meeting to this one and the current initiatives that are underway, it's recommended that staff undertake further investigation in contemplating suggestions and our alternatives for consideration by the committee, and we're providing this report for information to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you for that report. The item is now open for discussion. Is there any questions for trustees? I recognize Trustee Ben Cameron.
Thank you, Chair. When there's a rotten apple in the apple basket, you throw out the rotten one. And that is what we need to do with our question period. In this case, it doesn't mean eliminating our commitment to communication with the community. In fact, I think it means the opposite. I think it means we have to double down our efforts in being better communicators, as is contemplated by the staff audit right now. But I think, as all trustees may be able to see during our board meetings, that our question period is not an avenue to effectuate honest, open dialogue. It's really bad at that, and it can actually cause friction with our community instead. I think our public question period wastes not only our time, but our staff's time. And so I would put forward the following motion that I put forward last time. That the Governance and Policy Committee recommend to the Board of Trustees that sections 5.13.13 to 5.13.16 of the bylaws be deleted and that it be considered at the next meeting of the Board of Trustees. Thank you. And I believe Jillian has that to be put on the screen.
Thank you, Trustee Ben Cameron. Can I have a trustee to move the motion for Trustee Ben Cameron? I recognize Trustee Thatcher to put forward the motion.
I put that motion forward on behalf of Student Trustee Ben Cameron.
You have a motion on the floor, and I'll read the motion. It has been moved by, the motion has been moved by Trustee Christine Thatcher. Do we have a seconder for that motion? Oh, sorry, we don't need a seconder, so I will go ahead and read the motion. That the Governance and Policy Committee recommend to the Board of Trustees that sections 513.13 to 5.13.16 of the bylaws be deleted and that it be considered at the next meeting of the Board of Trustees. Discussion and question is now open. I recognize Trustee Edwards.
And thank you. And we did consider this motion before. And the thing is, we do have an information report in front of us, basically saying that because there is a communication audit and so forth, that we could probably have other ways of dealing with this. I do recognize that it is a tedious task to answer questions at this point in time. So my question was, before this motion came before us, was the fact that was sort of the timing of the audit and so forth, and when we can expect that. Before I can make a consideration on this motion, I would like the information as timing of the audit and sort of recommendations that would be coming back from governance from that. Thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair, the communications audit is not necessarily focused around the board table and board meetings itself. However, through the feedback that we are receiving, it's possible that there may be feedback that touches on that. So we would need to analyze the feedback that we have received on that. In terms of the timing of the communications audit, I believe we're anticipating that there will be some reporting to the audit committee because this is being done as part of the internal audit process. And I believe their May meeting, if I'm not mistaken. So we do have the data that we've collected so far from it, but we do need time to be able to analyze it because I'm happy to report that we actually had a lot of engagement from the community, from staff, and also from students through the thought exchanges that we ran. So we really would need to sift through that to see if there's anything relevant to this process. But in addition, something that we would like to do is go back and look at the data collected through the multi-year strategic plan process that took place last year. And then see if there's any insights that we can glean from that before making a staff recommendation. Of course, around this table, trustees have experienced the public question period process, and as mentioned in the report, we've done a cursory review of other boards and provided a summary of what we found, which is found in the analysis section of that report. In addition to looking at whether other school boards do have a public question period process, something I would note as well that this board does have at standing committee meetings is an opportunity for members of the public to submit presentations to that committee through a process where it's submitted in advance, the request is reviewed and then submitted. So, again, a bit longer answer, I think, than what you anticipated, but that is generally the timelines, but also the other information I think that this committee has in front of it.
Thank you, Executive Lead. I would now turn to Trustee Oldfield.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I agree with what Trustee Edwards is saying, and given that there may be information coming out of the thought exchange, focus groups, and surveys, I would like to know what we're going to put in place, if anything at all, prior to removing the public question period, so I move that the motion be deferred to not later than the October 2024 Governance and Policy Committee meeting.
May I have a, okay. Okay, seeing this motion takes forward, I will now call a vote. This is the motion to defer. It takes priority, so we're going to call a vote. Can I see those in favor, show of your cards? That motion is carried. We'll now proceed to our recommended actions. We have 3 recommended actions coming forward this evening. Our first recommended action item is a motion for an amendment to our consolidated bylaws. I will now call upon Trustee Morton to present this recommended action.
Excuse me, I wanted to go back regarding that information item. The statement was made that public question period is a waste of our time. I do not consider it a waste of our time. I just think that connection with the public is very important. So I'm very pleased that we have voted to defer.
Thank you for your follow-up. I would like to move on to the recommended actions, and you have the floor to speak to the first recommended action on your motion.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I am proposing this motion in order to provide greater clarity and to ensure consistency at board and committee meetings so that all motions must have a mover, must have a seconder in order to be debated and voted upon. This proposed change has come out of the collective work on the governance that trustees and staff have engaged in. And the motion is as follows: that the Governance and Policy Committee recommend to the Board of Trustees that the bylaws be amended as follows, and that the amendment be considered at the next meeting of the Board. Section 5, 12, 21. At board and committee meetings, a motion that has been moved and seconded is considered to be on the floor and will be decided by a vote. That is my motion.
Thank you, Trustee Morton. May I have a trustee to move the recommended motion as included? Seconder? Okay, thank you, trustee. This item is now open for discussion and any questions from trustees. It is also on the screen. We'll now take Trustee Deb Oldfield.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Initially, I was in support of this motion because I do like the idea of having consistency, but in having conversations and really thinking this through, my concern is that for the student trustees at committee, they would then need a seconder. Right now, they needed someone to move it for them, but then this also requires a seconder. So it could be more of a challenge then for student trustees to be able to put something forward at a committee meeting. That doesn't mean that there isn't something that could be amended in the bylaws to address that, but that doesn't address it as it stands right now. So I'm speaking against this motion for that reason.
Thank you, Trustee Oldfield. I will now move on to Trustee Ben Cameron.
Thank you, Chair. I can appreciate the intent of this motion, and I do appreciate Trustee Morton for bringing it forward, but I wish that Trustee Morton had actually involved the student trustees.
If I might interject, just for a technical issue, Student Trustee Cameron, have we lost our other members of the committee? We just can't see them on the screen. Okay, so they are still here. Okay.
Yeah, I can see them, thank you.
Sorry, Trustee Cameron.
Thank you, Chair. So I do appreciate the intent of this motion, but I also wish that I had, that the student trustees had been involved in the collective work of this, of bringing this forward, because I think we might be negatively impacted in a way that might not have been considered. And also, this would also apply to like audit committee, which I know only has 5 members, and I don't really think it makes sense for a committee with 5 members to need a mover and a seconder. I think seconds aren't supposed to be gatekeepers to the floor. They have a purpose of making sure it's a relevant discussion of what's going on. But I think committees are the perfect place for us to discuss the items that are in front of us. And if we are harming the ability of student trustees to bring forward a motion with already the barriers that we have to not being able to move a motion, I would not be in favor of this, and I would put forward the motion that the motion on the floor be postponed indefinitely. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Cameron. May I please have someone that will be willing to move the motion that Trustee Ben Cameron has put forward? I will recognize Trustee Oldfield. Okay, so now we have this motion on the floor to postpone this indefinitely. Can I call the vote? All in favor? 1. Trustee Arsenault, are you voting or abstaining? Okay. 1, 2.
Is there nobody voting
No,
online?
nobody else.
No votes online?
So does that
Oh,
count?
it carries.
That motion carries, thank you. Our next recommended action is the revised naming of school policy. I will now call on Associate Director Jim Markowski, Executive Lead Rob Surjanic, and General Counsel Cotter to bring forward this recommended action.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Miller, I'm happy to have this opportunity to share our recommended revisions to the naming of schools policy. As you'll remember, back in our January board meeting, we discussed the renaming of Lord Elgin Public School. There was some discussion at the time about the proposed name and whether or not further suggestions could be collated for consideration. And as a result of those deliberations, staff have drafted a revised naming of schools policy. What I want to do is, if I may, I'm going to walk you through the revised policy and just make a note of all the changes. It starts at page 23 of your package. The updated policy with the track changes is there. There's nothing on 23. On page 24, in section 5.3, you will note now that we are recommending that the director review all written requests for the renaming of schools, but will only bring a report to the board if the director is satisfied that section 5.4 of the school naming policy is engaged. At that time, if based on the report provided by the Director of Education, the Board of Trustees is satisfied that any of the criteria of section 5.4 are engaged, such that the name of the school is to be changed, a school naming committee shall be struck. So that would be a first report that comes to the Board of Trustees, seeking approval on whether the name change should occur or not. And if there is approval, we would move forward to the second tier of the process, which would require a school naming committee to be struck. The school naming committee will provide a short list of recommendations to the board based on the naming conventions set forth in sections 5.6 and 5.7 of this policy, and consistent with the terms of any procedure adopted under the policy. If I were to move to section 5.5, that's where the next changes are made. When the second report comes to board with recommendations of names, the board will accept the recommendations of the school naming committee and choose a name on the short list of names recommended, or refer the matter back to the committee for further recommendations of proposed names. These changes are consistent with the discussions that took place in January and our board's commitment to transparency and open communication, and we'd be happy to take any questions at this time.
Thank you, Executive Lead. I would like to ask if I could please have someone to move this recommended action. Sorry, offering questions and discussions. I'll move to Trustee Edwards.
Thank you. I like the clarity of the policy at this point in time to ensure that there's no misunderstanding whether the board may or may not change a name at that point in time when a decision is made, that it does meet the criteria and a report and recommendation is brought forward. I really like the clarity of that and the steps that follow. I have one question. Is just around those names that have been requested. It's not that I would like to see a formal report where they don't meet any of the criteria, but it would be interesting to have at least a summary, because from my perspective, if a community member then knows that, you know, if they've approached us as far as sort of that clarity, if they've approached us and saying, hey, I'm going to look at changing this name, and if it's already somewhat been decided that that name isn't, it doesn't meet any of the criteria, it would be nice to know to have that in order to say that, you know, again, they can go ahead and proceed, but this has already been question proceeded, so like a summary for the year, if something, you know, it might be no names are changed, but even an information report saying that these names have been come up and they didn't meet the criteria, so it didn't come forward. But that would be really interesting in order to basically inform the public as well. So I'm not looking at a full report, but just a summary of names or something, that if the names were put forward. I'm not assuming that there's going to be a whole bunch, but even like the IC, there's a summary at the end that we've had so many requests to rename schools, and you know they did not meet the criteria, something like that. So I just and that could be in the procedure. It doesn't have to change the policy, but it would be nice that that information came forward. But I really like the way, so I'm in favor of the changes in this policy at this time.
Thank you, Trustee Edwards. I'll be moving to Trustee Ben-Cameron.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I would echo those comments as well. I think this works towards hopefully not having kind of chaos ensue when we are renaming our schools. I do have two proposed changes that I would like the committee to consider. I'm wondering if they can be put on the screen before I read them. Oh, okay. I'll read them before they go on the screen. So the first one is just around including a student trustee on the committee. I think that's a good practice. So the following motion is that section 5.2 be amended by adding a student trustee after fewer than 2 trustees. So all this amendment would do is just add a student trustee to the school naming committee, along with the area trustees, which are no fewer than 2 trustees as it is right now.
So that's, just for clarity then, so we're talking about the bracketed section in 5.2, or is it just before the bracketed section?
Yeah, so it would just, put in a student trustee after the bracketed section. So it'd say, be composed of the area trustees, bracket no fewer than 2 trustees, a student trustee, and the family superintendent, blah, 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 the rest. So it just adds a student trustee.
Thank you, Trustee Ben Cameron. Is there a trustee willing to move Trustee Ben Cameron's amendment to 5?
Christine.
Okay, thank you. It will be Christine.
Any discussion on the amendment?
Any discussion or question on the amendment? Seeing no discussion, seeing no questions, I will now call the vote. On the amendment, okay, that motion is carried. Original motion. Now we are back to the main motion on the floor. Okay. I'll move to Trustee Ben Cameron.
Thank you, Chair. I have another amendment to section 5.5. I think we could do a little better job at kind of phrasing this in a way that I think it makes it more clear than it used to be, but I think it could still be more clear. So what I'm proposing it be read as is the board will only choose a name on the short list of names recommended by the school naming committee, but may refer the matter back to the school naming committee for additional recommendations or a new short list of recommendations. So it might not be easy to understand if it's not in front of you, but it rewords it so that I think it makes it more clear, in fact, that we have to choose one of the things, but at the same time, if we're not happy, we can put it back to the committee.
Can I, if I may, Chair Miller, just seek clarification? The way it's written right now, student trustee, it actually says exactly what you're outlining. So the board will accept the recommendation of the school naming committee and choose a name on the short list of names recommended. And then the board can refer the matter back to the school naming committee for recommendation of additional proposed names. I'm uncertain what your changes are.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so it's close to just rewording it. I think the phrase that I wasn't sure about is in the proposed changes, the board will accept the recommendation. So that is kind of what I'm rephrasing, and now it says you'll choose a name from the list is what the changes is what the amendment would change it to, is that you're choosing from the list. And so if they want to choose, if the names that come forward, they have to choose from one of those, but can send it back at the same time, which is what it says, but I think this is just clearer. And obviously you might be confused right now because it's not in front of you, but.
Thank you, Ben Cameron. Can I, at this moment, I'd like to allow for Executive Lead to respond.
And thank you, and through you, Chair Miller, I just want to provide clarity. When we're speaking to the board accepting the recommendation, that's just an understanding that a second report is coming forward. Within that report, the school naming committee will actually provide a short list of names that ultimately the Board of Trustees would choose from. And if for any reason you were not to choose from that list, you can still refer the matter back to the school naming committee for additional recommendations. So I just want clarity in terms of you're actually accepting the report from the school naming committee. That's really what it's meant to read.
Thank you, Executive Lead. I'd like to ask Trustee Ben Cameron if he's still interested in the motion he had put forward, or he'd like to remove the amended motion.
Yes, I would like to put it forward, although I know it's difficult when you're not able to look at it and read it in what I just spoke. So anyways, yes, I would like to put it forward still.
May I have a trustee to move this motion? Do I have any trustee willing to move this motion? Seeing none, we are now speaking to the recommended action that is in front of us. May I have a trustee that will move the recommended action found on page 22? Sorry. It's already moved. Can we have, now we will have, it's already been moved, so we will now proceed with discussion or questions. And any further questions or discussion? We'll now, sorry.
Sorry, if I might interject. I'm just picking up on Trustee Edwards' comments. And if there's an interest in the committee in having that, I actually think it should be in the policy rather than a procedure. So, and I'm happy to suggest some language if that's of interest to the committee. Not that, but your recommendation, Trustee Edwards, around the summary report of the rejected names. Is there interest in the committee, Chair? Should I bring forward my suggested language on Trustee Edwards' suggestion? Okay, I'm happy to do that. So what I'll suggest is that it go right before the heading on evaluation. So it would be the last paragraph under section 5. And we would say then, if the director is not satisfied that the request is or is likely to be a concern that engages one or more of the renaming criteria stipulated in section 5.4 of the policy, then the director shall maintain a record of the name and shall deliver a summary report at the end of the year of all such names.
May I have Council Cotter to repeat this suggested motion?
So that if the director is not satisfied that the request is or is likely to be a concern that engages one or more of the renaming criteria stipulated in section 5.4 of the policy, then the director shall maintain a record of the request and shall deliver a summary report at the end of the year of all such requests.
Thank you for moving that. Trustee Oldfield? Now we can, all in favor for the amended motion? That is carried. Now back to the main motion on the floor. You can have that on the screen. Call the vote. Okay. So we will now move to the motion to recommend, to have someone to move to recommend the actions on page 22. Can I have a trustee to move the recommended actions on page 22? Thank you, Trustee Morton. Okay, seeing that there has been a discussion, is there one more? Moving to Donna Edwards. Trustee Edwards, sorry.
Just a point of order in that the recommendation doesn't talk about it says as included in Appendix B, and the amendment we just made is not included as part of it. So I would say that the motion should be it should be recommended the governance and policy consider approve the revised naming of the school policy as included in B and amended amended as of this policy governance meeting, okay? That be considered the next Board of Trustees. And as amended, right?
Thank you, Trustee Edwards. We have the motion on the floor. All in favor? That motion is carried. Our next recommended action on the list is our revised Director Performance Review Policy. I will call on General Counsel Patrick Cotter and Executive Lead Robert Surjanic to present the recommendations.
Thank you very much. The report can be found starting at page 29 of the package, and we have prepared a proposed revised policy of the Director's Performance Review. That starts at page 38 of the package. So the reason for the amendment, as you're aware, is the new government regulations passed under the new amendments to the Education Act regarding Director's Performance Review. And the regulations 8324 contain a number of specific requirements as to the process and including the timing of the process. So there was some amendments that were needed to our policy to make sure we were compliant with the regulations. Those regulations were in force as of March I think it's 4th or 5th of this year. So we need to amend our policy to make sure we're compliant with those regulations. It's best probably to work off the track changes version that starts at page 38, but there is a couple of things I want to point out. First is that the language in red at the bottom of page 8, that was language that was circulated new as of today. Sorry, I'm just looking at it. It includes the purple as well. So the red and the purple on 40, 45, and 46. And once you read that sentence, by August 15th, the board shall post and deliver. All of that black language below that is deleted. It didn't, for some reason, it was deleted, but it wasn't in track changes. So when it printed, it looked okay on the electronic version, but it didn't print as track. So all the regular text below the last purple paragraph on 46 is deleted over to 47. So that language was the timing and preparation of the director's final report. That's all been dealt with now in that new section above. Much of it has been carried over, but it's new language and new timing. So subject to any questions you may have, and I'm sure there will be some, that's the draft policy for your consideration.
Thank you, Council Cutter. We are open for discussion or any questions. Trustee Edwards?
Thank you, and I noticed that sometimes, it says the chair of the committee, and other times it says the chair, and I know that there are certain requirements, particularly when it comes to posting and ensuring that the information, basically the report is sent to the ministry. It is the chair of the board, but I'm just wanting to ensure that I haven't been able to, when I'm going through this, because of the track changes and so forth, trying to, thank you for that clarity at the end, because that really confused me. But ensuring that it is, because most of the time it is the chair of the committee, but then it definitely for posting it and posting the review and submitting to the ministry the report that the review has been completed, and the actions have been completed, or the chair of the board. So I still haven't been able to go through now with these changes to ensure that the chair is the chair of the committee and the chair is the chair of the board. It's really a bit sometimes confusing, but that's just my comment.
So we will undertake that when this comes to board, we will make sure that we incorporate that in the final version and proofread it to make sure that the reference to the chair is correct. Sorry, there is one more addition that I want to point out, and it's in the separate report that you have that was not part of the package, the new report, and it's on near the bottom of page 39. I don't know why the page numbering's different, but anyway, It's section 4.1.4 is new. It just says, in an election year, for those of you who don't have it, here's what it says. In an election year, if the committee is reduced to less than 3 members, then additional members shall be placed on the committee at the organizational meeting. So it was just to ensure that the committee could continue if a number of trustees were not returning after the election. The regulations require that it be a minimum of 3. So if it stays at 3, then the committee would not change and would just continue. If it drops below 3 at the election, then additional members will be placed on that committee to make sure that there's at least 3 members on that committee, so it can complete the review cycle.
Thank you, Councillor Cotter. Seeing an additional discussion from Trustee Morton.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I'm curious to know about the numbers. So a minimum number of 3, a maximum number of 7. What if we have all members of the board who would like to serve on that committee? Are we prepared to say, no, I'm sorry, we have to limit this group to 7?
Through you, Chair. Yes, the way the regulation is worded, it's only a maximum of 7. So we will have to have a vote at the organizational meeting, and if it's contested, we will have to have a method to pick the 7 candidates. Luckily, we have a committee that's already been established by this board, and there are 7 members on that committee. So we are compliant. As of right now, we are compliant. We have the committee. We don't need to do anything. The committee has to be established by May 15th. That's for boards who don't already have a policy or a committee. So at least in terms of that first step, we're already compliant.
Thank you, Councillor Cotter. Moving to Trustee Ben.
Thank you, and I appreciate how restrictive and prescriptive the regulation is in terms of our policies and how we do anything around this, basically. Which, I mean, are we surprised? I'm wondering on section 4.1.4 if we should just get rid of the language of in an election year, because I think if a trustee resigns, that might also reduce the number on the committee. So maybe if we just say, if the committee is reduced to less than 3 members, instead of qualifying it as in an election year.
Yeah, makes sense. The risk is low. Makes sense, but then I guess it'd be when. I guess we could just leave it, that the board would, and that is, if it's because of an election, we would do it at the organizational meeting anyway. Then additional members shall be placed on the committee at a meeting of the board, at a meeting of the Board of Trustees, or at the organizational meeting, which I guess is a meeting of the board, but we'll just leave it at that then. At a meeting of the Board of Trustees, then would be my suggestion on that. No, it's fine. Unless anybody has an objection, I think we should just make a note of that and proceed on that basis.
Christine Thatcher. Trustee Thatcher.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I do just have a couple of just minor things. I think I did have a chance. I don't think everybody's had a chance to really go through that, and as we were kind of late getting it, but I did have a few minutes, and I think that having been to the workshop and taken a look at the information that was provided, I really feel that overall this policy does align. I wanted just to confirm that when we're talking about May 15th, we are talking about May 15th, 2024.
Correct. The policy is in effect right now.
That's the reason.
Sorry, the regulations are in effect right now.
Is in effect. And the reason that I asked that is that we did develop a position profile and objectives, and that was presented and accepted by the committee. However, it was not posted on the website. And now at the webinar, someone asked a question about something or other, and I think the response to several questions was to take direction from your general counsel. So I know we are taking your counsel here, and that's not going to be posted, but we do need to develop that performance plan. So I just wanted to be sure May 15th was the date. The other just a little minor thing, because we're aligning with the ministry guidelines, and we have used a lot of the language in here that has been suggested, the external consultant in the ministry document is referred to as the entity. And the only suggestion I have is that somewhere that does appear on there just to show compliance with the
I'm just pulling that up. I just want to take a look at the regulation on that. But just to come back to your earlier point, I guess a couple of comments, if I might, Chair Miller, through you. The regulations came into force immediately with no transition provisions for boards that had some process in place. So everything was effectively has to come to a stop by virtue of the regulations, and we have to be compliant with these regulations. These regulations do not have a annual objectives document like we were working on. It has a very specific document called the performance plan that has very specific requirements. So that's the document that will need to be created. The committee may make some use of the earlier document to feed information into the new performance plan, but that'll be up to the committee and the director in due course. So, and the date for that is July 31st. So even though it's a little bit odd the way the timing works, but the committee gets constituted effective as of May 15th, but doesn't start working till July 1st. So each committee starts working July 1st and works till June 30th. And they get constituted May 15th. So there's those dates to keep in mind. Yeah, I think, your other comment you had was on the entity. I guess I just want to look at that because I want to be sure that that relates to just to the external consultant and not to other potential options. So I can look at that while there's other discussion.
Okay, moving to Trustee Ben Cameron.
I could pass it back to Trustee Thatcher if she would like to speak.
Sorry.
Okay, perfect. I think the idea of the entity is in the tables. I'm not sure if that was what Trustee Thatcher was related to in the regulation, but in tables under section 5 and 6 in column 1, all of the things are described as a person or entity. I'm not sure. That's what I remember.
Yeah, I see that now, and that's my concern, I guess, is that the person or the entity can be a whole bunch of people. It can be the chair of the board, the minister, different entities. I think, though, Trustee Thatcher, it does in the regulations refer to an entity that has the requisite experience doing it. So I think it's used in a couple of different ways in the regulation. But I'm going to keep looking at it. Thanks, Student Trustee Cameron, though. That's helpful.
Yeah, and on the other part about posting it on the website, we, as Council Cotter said, we don't have to start we don't have an interim evaluation period under the regulation. We just have to we start the full one in July. And so until then, we don't have to do all of the posting publicly and all those things until we start the real thing July 1st. So I think we don't have to worry about posting it publicly for now until that time.
Thank you, Trustee Ben Cameron. Moving to Trustee Morton.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I was part of the webinar last week, And I posted a question. I have not received an answer, so I'm hoping that you could provide the answer. And that was regarding the 360. What are the requirements? How often? So they talk about biannual, but there's also biennial. How often are we to provide a 360?
Thank you. So if we look at the annual performance review section is in 4.3 of the policy. So that's, depends on which version you're looking at, but it's easier, I think, just to say 4.3. And the heading is in orange, annual performance review. And so if we go down to the bottom of the page, we see for the first evaluation cycle, which will be this one, and then every second one thereafter will be that, that full 360 that's listed there at the top of the next page. So that will be every 2 years. Okay? Once every 2 years. And then our policy also provides, though, that every year there'll be this, the directors will do the self-assessment under Section 2, which would then feed into the annual performance plan. So the board will have that every year, and the board will also have a mid-year review every year. So every year there will be a mid-year review and a final review by the board, and there will be the director's self-assessment. That'll happen every year, and then the 360 will be every second year. So, and the mid-year review and the final review includes, it's not really a 360, but it includes all that same type of feedback, but only from the Board of Trustees. So that, the Board of Trustees will participate in what we've been referring to as a 360. So you will provide feedback on performance, but none of the other participants that are listed on that long list of 360 will participate. That will only be every second year.
Trustee Thatcher?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. There was just one other minor thing that I understand that there are a number of performance review questionnaires that are available at the moment. The 360-degree performance review questionnaire is one of them, and I believe that we already have a plan in place in terms of how we're going to be preparing the questions for that going forward based on our feedback from the last director performance appraisal we did. But I'm just wondering if it would be wise for us even to seek some input from Boyden with respect to just saying that a performance review questionnaire, rather than being specific about the 360 as only one particular questionnaire.
Thank you. And through you, Chair Miller, I think that's a good suggestion, that it would be, because I think in the prior plan it was a defined term, the 360. So I did change it, I think, to say a 360. So I've tried to say, well, it could be, it's a questionnaire. It's not necessarily the same one all the time. But I think you're right, including the word 360, including the language 360 is a bit complicated too, because at times when there'll be a questionnaire that'll just go to the members of the board. So I think, we, subject to any other comments, we would come back with that change when we bring it to board. We'll undertake to make that change as just a sort of a cleanup when we bring it back. While there's I see no trustees have their hands up, so while there's a break in the action, I feel it's incumbent upon me to highlight some of the variance from the regulations, where we've because I tried to stick with our policy and merge in the requirements of the regulations. So there's some things that are a bit above and beyond. The ministry's made clear, and the regulations, I think, are self-evident in this respect, that it's a minimum requirement, and it would be open to the board to have some additional language in terms, as long as they're not, contradictory to what's in the regulations. So I guess the first thing is that this draft document still maintains a dispute resolution process, which is something that's not contemplated in the regulations. So this is something that is available to the director if there's an issue with the performance review. Previously, the way the policy was drafted, the final review and creation of the final review was delegated to the external consultant. So in that circumstance, both the director and the committee could make submissions and the consultant would have the final say. Under the new regulations, it's clear that the committee has the final say. So the committee has the final say on the document. So rather than having sort of a two-party dispute resolution process, it's now just the director that has the ability to make a challenge, and then there'd be a dispute resolution panel that would be convened, and all the dispute, given the new language in the regulations, the dispute resolution panel can't make a binding ruling. They can only go back to the committee and say, we think that the director has a point on this, and we suggest you consider this. And then the committee can still say no or yes. The committee still has final say. So we've tried to build that in just in honor of the language that the policy employed before, and to try to bring some consistency to it. There is a challenge, which is the timelines in the regulation are very specific in terms of when the director's supposed to get the copy, when the committee's supposed to get the copy in draft and provide comments. So we can't deviate from that. That is a by date, so we hope that if the parties are acting in good faith, they can deliver things a little bit early and build more time around to allow the dispute resolution. But it could be that it has to be done in a week. So that would be, put a Zoom meeting together, put a panel together, come forward quickly with the concerns, hopefully there's not many, and get a recommendation back on the document. So that is the language that I flagged at the start of the meeting. That is, it depends what version you're working from, but that's that language in red after 4.6. So that's new. The other thing that I think, not new, sorry, that is above and beyond the regulations. The other thing is the regulations only contemplate the role of the consultant in the 360 that happens every 2 years. Our policy had a pretty significant role for the consultant, and so I've tried to maintain the role of the consultant throughout the process, even though the regulations only require the consultant to participate in 360. So the consultant here basically is engaged at each of the key steps to help the committee stick handle it and work with the director. And I think the policy before was drafted so that there was that buffer. If there was ever an issue of concern between the committee and the director, they would have the consultant there to help navigate it. So that's why that's been maintained.
Thank you for that, Councillor Calder. Now we move to Trustee Ben Cameron, and after this, I would like to close the debate.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, very quickly, in the dispute resolution section, it says the panels shall consist of the following: one member selected by the director, a second member. Those are outside parties, not trustees, I guess. So that's my first question, or I mean, maybe they are. And then the second part, I'm just wondering about new language in the regulation around keeping documents on file for 6 years, I think it was. If you could just talk about that quickly.
Yeah, so I'll deal with the second point first, if I may, and through you, Chair Miller. There was a requirement to maintain some documents for 6 years, including by the chair of the committee. So what I've contemplated here is it says that the chair of the committee shall maintain their copy in a locked cabinet in the office of the general counsel, because it may be that there's chairs of the committee that aren't here in 6 years, so we don't want it, in someone's basement. So that's the idea, that's the chair's copy, it would be marked as such, and it would be kept in a locked cabinet in the office of the general counsel. To your first point, Yes, it's meant, it reads as the member of the panel, but I take your point, and I think that's a third clarification that we can bring forward when we bring this back to the board for approval, that we could tidy that up just to make sure that that's clear.
Any further clarifications? Seeing Trustee Thatcher?
Oh, thank you. And just one small thing. I did speak with Council Cotter with regards to bringing the draft, the new draft policy to the next DPA meeting that is scheduled somewhere here towards Monday, just so that Boyden does have an opportunity to be part of any discussion around it. I just wanted to bring that forward in public forum.
Thank you, Trustee Thatcher. Seeing Trustee Edwards, and this will be the final, debate.
Through you, Chair, I just appreciate the comments about where these are by deadlines and that we can do things ahead of time, because it's pretty presumptuous that, you know, the government has possibly the boards having meetings in July and August in order to meet these deadlines. So I appreciate that we when we look at this internally and looking at through processes, that we try to meet the deadlines, so that we do not have to, and the director doesn't have to meet during those times in staff and when it comes to dealing with us. But that was one of the comments that you know, tongue in cheek, are they paying us extra money to work during the summer? Tongue in cheek. Thank you.
Thank you for a fulsome discussion. I would like to now ask if there is a trustee that is willing to move the recommended action on page 30. Moved by Trustee Morton. I'd like to call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Seeing as there is no further business to discuss, may I have a motion to adjourn this meeting? Thank you, Trustee Edwards. All in favor? This meeting is now adjourned.